And now for the main events. Let us now create and execute then a replication job of our SQL 1 machine here, that high priority SQL server that must always be online with a very short RTO. So let's continue here. Let me come down here to inventory and let's go to vCenter 1 right here. And under vCenter 1, let's go to our SQL server here. Let us initiate then a replication job here for SQL 1. Let's call this our SQL 1 replication job 1. I know I'm using great naming here. For this, we have some advanced controls down here for enabling replica seeding. So if I have a seed in the other site, a network remapping, if I want to do that network remapping, and also re-IPing if I have a different IP addressing scheme. Now of these, I'm going to show you all of these except for replica seeding because I don't actually have a seed over there in a format that's easily usable, but I can actually use replica mapping. So rather than using replica seeding, let's use replica mapping for an existing virtual machine that already happens to be in that remote location. So let me choose next over here. And I'll come down here for the virtual machine. Here's SQL 1. And as before, I can choose the source and exclusions and recalculate all the usual stuff we're used to seeing in a backup job. We're now just adding some of the additional features here, like where this virtual machine should go. For this, I need to choose which host or cluster. In my case, this will be vCenter DR. For that, I will also choose then the data center down here. That's the data center DR. And then ultimately a host to put this on. So ESXi DR right here. Once I've determined this will populate then the resource pool, the VM folder, and the data store onto which we'll then store this virtual machine. You can go through in here and change your different resource pools if you want. This is the default resource pool here. This is also the default VM folder. I haven't created any folders here in this infrastructure, but I am going to change my data store here, not to my images location, but to my other data store, which I believe is right down here for virtual machines. And so if I choose OK here, this is going to replicate that to that data store in that remote location. For this, I can now choose a network mapping right over here to set up which network there in vCenter that I want to map this virtual machine to. I'm not so much here talking about the actual IP addresses, rather I'm talking about the virtual networks that exist there in vCenter. And so if I choose Browse over here, I can come here first to vCenter 1, and then select my virtual machine network, my VM network right there, which I will then map to the VM network over on the other side. You may use different names. I'm using the same name here because that's the default name right out of the box. But this ensures that the right logical NIC gets plugged into this virtual machine when it ends up over in that remote ESXi server. And so I'll choose OK over here to then complete the network mapping. And then I also want to go through re-IPing this virtual machine. This virtual machine in this current location is actually 192.168.3.150. And so let me reset this to make it 192.168.3.150 with a 24-bit subnet mask. And then over on the other side, I will make it 0.150. So let me change this from 4.star to 0.150 to hard code in this IP rule, and I'll set the default gateway for that location, 192.168.0.1. In that location, we're still using the same DNS server, so 192.168.3.100, and we're not using wins in this environment, so I'll leave those alone. This will ensure that when I do go over to that remote location, I can inject in this new 0.150 address so that the virtual machine can interact then with the network on which it is now existing. Once I've done that, I'll come down here to Next, and I'll determine on which repository I want to host then the source metadata. So this is in the source location. Obviously, if I'm doing some replication from one place to another, I need to have some understanding about what actually has changed. And so the repository for the metadata associated with this transfer, I'm going to store here in my local site on that DAS repo right here. As usual, I want to come down here to the advanced view to take a look at any of the other configurations I might need. I probably should exclude any swap file blocks or any deleted file blocks. That's just extra unnecessary data to be transferred. We talked earlier about how the additional compression levels add a lot of extra CPU without a lot of extra compression of data, and how our default storage optimization is a good configuration here. I can continue to do notifications, SNMP or email notifications. Here are my vSphere configurations. Here is the option to use storage snapshots if I have that specialized storage appliance, and then any scripts that should occur before or after the job. I'll choose OK over here and then Next to take me to the data transfer page. For this, I can again hard code in a source proxy and a target proxy by determining which one I want to select here. I'm not going to do that, so I force it into automatic selection. Again, kind of a better idea when you start thinking about scale. So I'll hit cancel here and allow Veeam to automatically select which proxy it should use. It will generally do a good idea of determining which one is local to both the source and target location. But I do want to use that WAN accelerator right over here. I will choose Veeam 1 and Veeam DR as my source and target WAN accelerator. As before also, I do want to enable application-aware processing, just like we did before, and I want to punch in those guest OS credentials, that local administrator account, and test that against the guest interaction proxy. If this tests successfully, as it did before, this will ensure that that guest interaction proxy can then inject what it needs to in order to be able to make all these changes to that virtual machine. Here you can see we have a success, so I'll choose the Close button down here and then click Next. Now this final page down here is where we determine how often we want this replication job to occur. Earlier when we were doing backups, we tended to focus our backups on maybe a once a day kind of cycle. But here with replication, the assumption is that the disaster recovery machine is closer in terms of changes to the primary machine. And so we might not necessarily want this done every day, but maybe every hour right here. And so I'll choose this to occur every hour to update the virtual machine on the remote site with whatever's changed over the course of that hour. Again, as before, we have our automatic retry settings and our backup window settings here, but I'm going to choose OK here and then actually run the job once I complete the configuration. This initial job, I'm going to come back here to home and show you, this initial job right here can take a pretty extended period of time. And so let me actually pause things, and when we come back, I'll show you how long this job took and exactly what we'll see after that initial transfer completes and we begin regular replication from one location to the other. Now, fast forwarding things just a minute here, I do want to show you the results of the job. This job took about a little more than 11 minutes to complete. And so here under statistics, we can see 11 minutes and 19 seconds to complete the transfer of this content from one place to the other. Here we can have our target WAN as 100% of the bottleneck for this transfer going on. And so one might expect that to be the case if I have a pretty latent network connection from one place to the other. But if we take a look here at just what actually occurred, we went through and did a global cache synchronization. We removed a VM snapshot. We deleted a helper snapshot. We transferred over a copy of the hard drive right over here, about 26 gigs in size, and ultimately finished the processing right down here with no corrupted blocks. And so this is an example of what actually happens once you complete then this SQL replication job. And then back here in our inventory, we can now see then that we have a virtual machine that exists in both of these locations. So here is vCenter 1 with our SQL 1 machine right there. Here is ESXiDR right there with our SQL 1_ replica machine that's currently powered off. The next step in this process, as we'll find out here in the clip coming up next, is to actually initiate a failover then to this replica machine to see if it's actually usable as a replacement virtual machine for the one that we are going to simulate has just failed.